What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and special guest Michael Traikos of the Hockey News. That'll be fun to navigate today, two Michaels. But very happy to have both of them on with me today, here to come to you as we always do, talking about the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we get into all of it today, and there is a lot of it, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys, we got to start with the big news of the week. Brad Treliving out as GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs as of Monday night. He was fired in his third season as GM after replacing, of course, Kyle Dobes in May of 2023. So, Michael Augello, I'll start with you here first. What do you make of the timing of this decision? Maybe not the decision itself being all that surprising, but what do you think of the timing to do it now, so close to the end of the season? And I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll let you explain anyway. How would you assess Treliving's tenure as GM of the Leafs?
Yeah, we're going in alphabetical order here. Augello, Traikos.
Well,
It was a disaster, an unmitigated disaster. I mean, it started off bad where he signed guys like Ryan Reeves and Max Domi and David Camp to long-term deals. I think he did okay in his second year when he brought in Chris Tanev, and but the trade deadline last year was an unmitigated disaster with the Brandon Carlo deal and what they ended up giving up for him, and Scott Lawton, and then Craig Berube misuses him on the fourth line. The coach and the general manager didn't seem to be on the same wavelength, which is always a problem. Even though personally, I guess they got along, but you trade for a player and then you're supposed to use the player. And this year, he did not get I think what was expected in terms of players traded at the deadline. They did get a first round pick for Nick Waugh, but they didn't get enough for Bobby McMahon or Scott Lawton. And the talk that came out afterward about them possibly trading Matthew Nyes, I think was one of the nails in the coffin. Now, Elliot Friedman, other insiders are reporting that, basically he said, well, if you're not going to, extend me, then you may as well let me go now. And there's history within I think the Toronto Raptors did that about 20 years ago, where Glenn Grunwald said, just let me go if you're not going to renew my contract. That's probably what happened. The oddity is a Monday night, 2 hours before, the extremely anticipated game. Not exactly the greatest timing, but right now, this organization is such a morass of confusion and disillusion that nothing surprises me anymore.
I just love that the guy from Buffalo is just giving it to Toronto fans and the organization for being dysfunctional. Like, oh boy, well, what a time to be alive, eh, Mike?
Well, I'm not the only one who's doing that from Buffalo, but I won't say anything more.
Well, from a native of Toronto's perspective, Michael Traikos, what are your thoughts on the timing of this move in particular?
Yeah, normally you wait until after the playoffs, Emma, before we start saying that the GM was awful and he was a disaster. This time you don't even get into the playoffs. So it's a bit new for an organization that's been in the postseason since, drafting Auston Matthews. Like it's been a nice run that the Toronto Maple Leafs have had, albeit, it's a run where, you get to the playoffs and then you quickly are out of the playoffs. I agree with what Mike said. The only thing I'll say is I really think Brad Treliving, his biggest blunder was Mitch Marner. And, whether you want to blame Marner for part of that, fine. He tried to trade Marner at last year's deadline, tried to actually get Mikko Rantanen, which, in a revisionist history, if Mikko Rantanen's on the Toronto Maple Leafs right now, there's no way they're missing the playoffs. This is probably a team that's battling it out for Buffalo and Tampa Bay for top spot in the Atlantic. But unfortunately, wasn't able to pull off that trade. Marner didn't want to waive the no move clause. And worst of all, he lost Marner, in free agency and then didn't replace him. And I think that's the caveat. It's one thing to lose a player it's another to just not even replace him in the lineup. So, had he have gone out and, managed to convince one of those guys in Florida, like a Sam Bennett or a Brad Marchand or even a Aaron Ekblad to come to Toronto, again, I think this looks a lot different. But you add it all up, like, missed the playoffs this year, lost Marner for nothing, and wasn't able to get Toronto over the hump. And it's not a surprise that Treliving is out right now.
Well, you mentioned Mikko Rantanen as a potential target for the Leafs. So that brings us to the team that did end up getting Mikko Rantanen. That's the Dallas Stars. They actually just extended their GM, Jim Nill, to a 2-year contract extension. So Nill's last contract was set to expire this summer, but now 2 more years. The Stars have only missed the playoffs 4 times during Nill's 13 years as GM so far. And he's, of course, won GM of the year the past 3 seasons. And, the Stars are a team that still, they have yet to bring home a Stanley Cup under Nill, but I feel like they are always one of those teams that is just kind of right there. They're right there. And Nill, obviously winning GM of the year 3 years in a row, has, really constructed a soundly constructed roster here. So, Mike Augello, what do you think of the decision to keep him on for 2 more years? And what do you think of his tenure with the team overall? And how much do you think getting that elusive Stanley Cup is going to help define his tenure as GM of the Stars?
I mean, I think part of the reason why he signed the extension is because they haven't won a Stanley Cup and he wants to see it through. I mean, they're right on the precipice. They're an excellent organization. They're deep. They're not afraid to spend money. They're bold, and Nill is part of that. But, they draft and develop well. And that's, like, they were only able to get Mikko Rantanen because they had drafted Logan Stankoven, and they could trade him along with a first-round pick in the deal to get Rantanen. So, I'm sure that this was talked about before it came out, but I'm sure that had it gotten to the point where he was unsigned, that Toronto would probably ask to see if they could talk to him, because he was without a contract at the end of the year. But you'd be foolish to leave Dallas where they are right now. They're a team, I think, with top 3 or 4 Stanley Cup contenders this year. If things break right, they're in that tough division. But I don't blame Jim Nill for leaving, and I don't blame the Dallas Stars for locking him up.
Yeah, and speaking of locking up, like, they have a lot of their players still locked up. And I was just kind of scrolling through, cap wages here, and it looks like basically their core and some are all under contract for at least the next 2 to 3 years, if not longer. So, what a job Jim Nill has done. And the Rantanen trade is one thing, but even bringing in Glenn Gulutzan after you lose Peter DeBoer, or, part ways with Peter DeBoer, Dallas hasn't missed a step. And I think it's also the trades he didn't make. I think a lot of people were expecting the Jason Robertson trade to happen at some point this year. That didn't happen. And Jason Robertson's having arguably one of his best years in the NHL, and they're going to need him in the playoffs. So one of those trades where you're glad, if you're a Dallas fan, that he didn't pull the trigger on.
Well, and you mentioned Robertson. That's something that immediately came to mind for me. I'm thinking, with Nill now extending for 2 more years, what does that mean for Robertson's future with the organization? Imagine that would have an impact on negotiations. Obviously, he's a player they would love to re-sign in Dallas if they can make the cap math work. Definitely a piece of their core. Speaking, unfortunately, now of core young players, the Maple Leafs, who we talked about earlier, faced the Anaheim Ducks on Monday, but the Ducks lost Cutter Gauthier to an upper body injury in the first period of their game. So Gauthier, really important piece of this Ducks team, leads the team in goals with 38 points, 65. Mike Augello, it's unclear what the timeline is for his return, but with just 8 games left in the regular season and the Ducks right now sitting in first place in the Pacific Division, how concerning is it for their playoff outlook here long term?
Well, I think they can still finish in first place because Edmonton is without Draisaitl, and he's not expected to come back until the playoffs. But based on what I saw last night against Toronto, I mean, Anaheim is a young team that cannot shut things down, shut games down. They gave up a 3-1 lead to a team that basically is quit, even though last night was the game that they worked themselves up into a lather because they were proving themselves that they cared after not responding to Austin Matthews getting hurt. But Anaheim, I mean, I love the talent on that team, and Gauthier is a big part of it. I mean, I can't see them making a deep run if he is not part of the playoff lineup. If they finish in first place, they likely match up with like Utah. And I would like to be that wild card team playing Anaheim if Gauthier is out long term, because they have some good young players, but they definitely need him as a trigger man. And if he's out for a long time, then that's going to be a problem for them.
Yeah, Mike, do you think that there is a scenario in which the Ducks can make a deep or deep-ish playoff run without Gauthier? Because this was looking like a team that was kind of a bubble playoff team to begin with before the season started. So what do you kind of make of their future outlook right now without Gauthier?
Yeah, obviously you'd rather have Cutter Gauthier in your lineup. I'll say a couple things like, you hope it's not long-term, Emma, and the second thing is, Leo Carlsson missed some time earlier this year, right before the Olympics. And, the Ducks seem fine without him in the lineup. The other thing is they have 6 players who are going to finish with 20 goals or more this year. It would be 7 if Mason McTavish hadn't missed some time as well. He might even get there. So that tells me you've got a lot of depth. Obviously, Cutter Gauthier is your top goal scorer, top point producer, but if he can't get there, you still got Chris Kreider, you got a Beckett Seneca who, as a young guy has been just awesome for them. And so you have a lot of guys who are kind of built in that same mold as a Cutter Gauthier, kind of that power forward style. So, they're not hurting for offense and they're not hurting for those kind of players. So that's the good thing. It's not just, this isn't the San Jose Sharks where you've got Cutter Gauthier leading the team in scoring, and the next highest guy is 50 points back.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, though, Gauthier not the only player injured on Monday. And very unfortunately for the Colorado Avalanche, Cale Makar was injured in their 9-2 win over the Calgary Flames on Monday. So Makar, of course, being who he is, still had 3 points in the win. He had 3 assists before he got injured in the second period, took an awkward hit from Adam Klapka, left the game. Head coach Jared Bednar said they're going to know more, hopefully Tuesday, Wednesday, later in the week. But right now, we still don't know anything concrete about Makar's outlook here. But how much of a threat are the Avalanche in the playoffs, Mike, if Cale Makar isn't in the lineup? Because obviously, they still have Nathan MacKinnon. They still have a very deep roster. But, I mean, how much is Makar pivotal to their playoff success?
I mean, he's essential. I mean, looking at that Central Division, I mean, I've always called that 2-3 game the corridor of death, because you don't have a chance to get through, even if you win it, because then you're coming up against the first place team. But in this instance, if it's a Makarless Avalanche and he's out long term, and we all hope that's not the case, their fallback then is their point man of the power play is probably Sam Malinsky or Devin Taves, and their power play won't be as effective. Or maybe Brent Burns as a 40-year-old will step in the interim, but that's not Cale Makar. They need him as an offensive driver. And, they're not particularly strong in goal, even though they both Woods have had good seasons this year. And Nathan MacKinnon is amongst the best in this league, but Makar is as well. He's probably the Norris Trophy winner, or maybe finishes second. If they're without him for a long time, they're not making the Stanley Cup Finals. I just don't see it.
Both Woods. I like that. The Lumberyard, as they're known, the goaltending tandem in Colorado, Wedgwood and Blackwood. Mike, what do you think of this loss? Obviously, I mean, it goes without saying this is a massive loss for the Avs, but do you agree with Mike about their, how much this impacts their potential to get to a Stanley Cup final?
Oh, sure. And I agree with everything Mike said. There's certain players you can't replace, right, Emma? So, it's like Edmonton losing Connor McDavid. Although if you lose Connor McDavid, you still have Leon Draisaitl. In this case, Devon Toews is a great defenseman, but I think he's a great defenseman while playing with Cale Makar. I don't think we've ever seen him on his own in this kind of scenario. And you're not going to ask Devon Toews to be the next Cale Makar and just kind of step up and do what Cale was doing, because, Cale's just on another level. So, if Colorado were, if they had number one, if they had the top seed locked up, or if they were in the Pacific Division where you're going, all right, we can just get through the first 2 rounds without Makar, and hopefully he comes back in the conference final. That's one thing. But, if Mike's right and they fall to the number 2 spot and you've got to play Minnesota, well, I don't know. Do you give Minnesota the edge now in a head-to-head against Colorado? Maybe. Minnesota's not a bad team, obviously, and it's going to come down to maybe goaltending in that scenario. But either way, this would be a huge blow for Colorado if they're missing Cale for any extended time.
And who is Makar often compared to? Quinn Hughes, who now plays for Minnesota. So that could be worth keeping in mind as well. Mike, what were you going to say?
It all really depends on who they match up with in the first round. I mean, it's going to be that second wild card team, and it could be one of the bottom feeders in the Pacific. They could beat that team without Makar. It all is a question of how long this injury is. If he can come back in the second round, then they would have a good chance. It all depends. If this is something of a serious nature and it's 6 to 8 weeks, then, like I said, I don't think they're getting out of the getting to the Stanley Cup final out of the West.
Yeah, I just looked at the standings. I didn't realize they're 8 points up on Dallas as well. So that's probably safe, right?
Yes. Colorado, they definitely front loaded. I think they'll be okay down the stretch here without Cale Makar. Once they get into the playoffs, though, we will see. One of the teams that's sitting technically within the playoff race right now, just 2 points back for the second wildcard spot in the West, is the San Jose Sharks. Obviously, big part of the reason they are still technically in the hunt is Macklin Celebrini. He became the 6th teenager in NHL history and the first since Sidney Crosby to get 100 points in a single season. He had 3 points against the St. Louis Blues on Monday. So that puts him in a category with Crosby, as I mentioned, who actually did it twice, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Dale Hawerchuk, and Jimmy Carson on an exclusive list of teenagers to get to that 100-point mark. So, Mike, considering the team that surrounds Celebrini in San Jose right now, is this one of the most impressive seasons from a player that we've seen in the modern NHL? Because this is not a team of superstars right now. It's still a very young, developing team.
Yeah, it's extremely impressive. I mean, it's not only because he's so young, but because he's been so dominant and he's doing it on his own. I mean, remember when we're doing this show probably in September or October, we thought maybe he's got a chance to sneak on as a 13th forward for Team Canada at the Olympics. And then he ended up being on the top line, and he was a driving force on that team. So he's a special player. It's like we're getting spoiled. Macklin Celebrini is a special player. Matthew Schaefer is a special player as a top overall pick in this most recent draft. And Gavin McKenna probably is going to be a special player. It's like we are getting spoiled as hockey fans and as observers of the game. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be up to Mike Grier to build around this guy, and he's got time to do it because he's only 19.
I think you go back one more year with Connor Bedard in that category as well. I think that we've all been bedarded as hockey fans by, this kind of generational talent in each class. But Mike Traikos, what do you think of what Celebrini's been able to do this year with the Sharks, and where do you see him going from here?
Yeah, I didn't see this coming, Emma. And, I saw glimpses of what he was going to be last year, but I still thought he was going to be more of a two-way guy and maybe at the best, 82 point season kind of guy. He had 63 points last year. He's already got 101 points this year. He might end up doubling what he did as a rookie, which is, you talked about Connor Bedard, Emma, and, he had a great rookie year. Then he fell off a bit as a sophomore. That's usually the trend is, everything looks kind of, you're just playing with house money as a rookie. Then year 2 comes around and everyone kind of gets used to your tendencies. It almost seems like it's the reverse now with Celebrini, where, he's learning more about the game and figuring out how easy it is for him, which is just kind of remarkable. It goes to show, like, if he had someone to play with, are we talking about a guy who's scoring 140 points this year, 150? Because to have 50 more points than your next highest scorer and have 100 points, that is mind blowing. Like, every top scorer has a running mate, whether it's McDavid with Draisaitl or, Kucherov playing with, whether it's, Braden Point or sometimes Jake Gensel. Like, you always have someone there to kind of either pass you the puck or you're passing the puck too. In Celebrini's case, he's literally doing it on his own. So, I don't know how he does it, but, to your point earlier, we're witnessing something special.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, Celebrini almost single-handedly keeping the Sharks in the playoff race right now in the West. As I mentioned, they're 2 points back of Nashville for that second wildcard spot, so still very much within reach. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the Vancouver Canucks. Rough year for them this year, and perhaps not surprisingly at all, as a result of that, Nick Kypreos wrote this week that Patrik Allvin, the GM, does not expect to survive past this season with the Canucks. So not a total shock there. He's been GM of the Canucks since 2022, signed a multi-year extension in 24, but disastrous last couple of seasons here in Vancouver that included the departures, of course, of JT Miller and Quinn Hughes. Mike, do you see him sticking around for another rebuild, or do you think that expectation that Allvin will be gone after this year is pretty on point?
I think it's a clean sweep. I think probably Jim Rutherford, if he had, I know Jim Rutherford's in his late 70s. I don't know if there's been an announcement of him retiring, but if he's not retiring, they're going to fire him. And Patrik Allvin deserves to be fired, not only for the things that you mentioned, but the disastrous not trading Elias Pettersson when you had the ability to do so before the no trade or no move clause kicked in. I mean, they're not bad. They're historically bad. And, I think they did the right thing in terms of trading Quinn Hughes because he had a year left in his contract and they had the ability to get 2 or 3 pieces that might help them going forward. But, they're a rudderless ship right now. And Allvin, along with Rutherford, are really responsible for that. And that's going to be a tough job. That's going to be a really tough job. You might get to have the first pick in the draft if they win the draft lottery to attract somebody. But that's a tough job for a GM. That's a market that is very critical of their management. And, they're going to have to be given some time to sort of dig themselves out from a really bad situation.
Yeah, it's funny because I agree, Mike. They're in a terrible spot, and yet I'll give Allvin credit for the mark of a good GM is you're going to make mistakes. It's how you kind of rectify those mistakes. And I thought Allvin and the Canucks did pretty well in the Quinn Hughes trade. I thought they did well in moving Connor Garland as well as like Tyler Myers and some others. So they do have a lot of pieces. I think the key is going to be, can they win the draft? And, right now they're pretty much locked up last place. So they're going to have the best odds of winning the chance of getting a Gavin McKenna or a Keaton Verhoff or Ivor Stenberg, whoever they might choose. But, do you want Allvin there not only to make those picks, but also to, possibly trade Elias Pettersson and, steer this team towards a rebuild? I don't know. To be honest, Allvin is one of those weird cases. It almost seems like Jim Rutherford's running the team and Allvin's just there as this kind of guy. So, I don't know. I think the challenge will be, if you're deciding to move on from Pettersson, do you want Allvin to pull the trigger on that? But, based on his trade history, I'd have more confidence in him than I would in like a Brad Treliving, who, it seems like he's on the losing end of every trade he makes.
Absolutely. Going to be interesting to see, like you said, Mike, it's not an easy job, not a super enticing job to come into, to be in charge of the rebuild, assuming Allvin does depart from Vancouver. So interesting to see what happens there. Want to shift the focus out east now to Montreal. So we've talked about on the show here Montreal's goaltending being it was a strength for them last year, somewhat surprisingly, and then this year it became a weakness. However, Jakub Dobes, NHL first star of the week last week. He appeared in 3 of the Canadiens' 4 wins. He stopped 100 out of 104 shots that he faced. And so he was assumed to be the backup to Sam Montembeault, kind of turned into more of an even split tandem situation. But now it looks like Dobes is really the one who's breaking out. And then you've got Jakub Fowler in the wing showing promise in his limited starts too. So, Mike, where does this leave Sam Montembeault? Because we thought that he was going to be sort of the goaltender of the future in Montreal. Even, way before the Olympics happened, he was maybe even on a few short lists for goaltender for Team Canada. So where do you think that leaves him right now?
It leaves him on the short list of goalies that are going to be traded in the offseason, along with Jordan Binnington and Anthony Stolarz. I mean, the free agent class is terrible. It's Stuart Skinner and Freddie Anderson. And anybody who's seen Freddie Anderson, he can't stay healthy any longer. So Stuart Skinner, and we know Skinner does really well, and that's lose Stanley Cup Finals. So I think that Montembeault, it hasn't been a great year for him. Dobes has stepped up a little bit, but his overall statistics this year, he's only a 900 save percentage. So Montreal is still a team that's learning how to play good team defense. They have dynamic offensive players. And Lane Hudson is one of the best offensive defensemen in the league. But the reason that I'm not exactly high on them in terms of their playoff situation is they have to play better defensively to win playoff games. And if they come up against a Buffalo or a Carolina in the first round, it's going to be tough for them. But Dobes probably is the guy they go to start the playoffs. But I wouldn't be surprised if he falters, that they go with Fowler. Fowler is the future, and he's the guy who everybody thinks is going to be their number one goalie, their next Carey Price. So they may decide the future is now, and if they get down in a series, they may go to Fowler. But I think they'll start the playoffs with Dobes as their number one.
Ooh, I think Fowler is the number one for me, and I like the idea of the young kid coming in, nothing to lose. What is he, like 21 years old? It's kind of funny, Emma, like you mentioned, like Montembeault was thought of as the goalie of the future for Montreal. And I think there's this idea out there that he is a young and up and coming guy. He's turning 30 this year. And I know 30 is not old, but he's not a young guy anymore. This is his 5th year in Montreal. Before that, he was with Florida. So, enough is enough. Like I think Montreal fans have seen enough out of Montembeault. They see the future, the real future in Fowler and Dobes. So easy decision. I just don't know. Is there a team that has seen enough out of Montembeault where they're like, yeah, this guy could be a legit number one, or is he now backup status for most NHL clubs?
Well, let me just interject one thing. I mean, how many number ones, true number ones, are there in the NHL right now? You've got,
on one hand.
Yeah, Vasilevsky, Ottinger, UC Saros, five Sorokin. Most teams now are using tandems. And Lindy Ruff said today he basically both goalies are playing well. That's why the starter for Buffalo in the playoffs is up in the air. I think teams will be looking at Montembeault's or Stolarz's and say, okay, that guy, we can get 30, 35 games out of that guy. And you're just not going to get a 60-game goalie out there in a trade or in free agency. Those are the guys you have to develop.
Yeah, very true. Looking more at a 1A, 1B instead of a 1 and 2, I think, around the league. What a wrap up today. I know, Mike Traikos, you already went over this on the big show on Monday, so go check that out if you haven't seen it. But can't leave here without talking about Bruce Cassidy getting fired by the Vegas Golden Knights with 8 games left in the season, and then getting replaced by John Tortorella. I mean, the timing of this, I'll be honest, when I first saw the news, it was from a third-party account, and I had to immediately go to the team account to make sure it was real because I thought it was fake because of the timing of all of this. So
not that far from April Fool's, right?
Right. I was like, is this an early April Fool's? Maybe. But I think, again, with this timing being what it is, I highly doubt we're going to see any more coaches replaced before the end of this regular season. But Mike Augello, do you see any being replaced this offseason? I mean, I think we can all agree Craig Berube is number one on that list, but other coaches that stand out to you that could be sent packing this offseason?
Yeah, Craig Berube is toast. It's just a question of it's rye toast or whole wheat. Sheldon Keefe in New Jersey. I think he's done. I mean, it's only been 2 years, but I think, their fall this year. I mean, a lot of it's going to go to Tom Fitzgerald, and he may be out as well as a general manager and team president. But like with Toronto, I think there is a want and a need, if you're hiring a general manager, that general manager gets his choice as coach. If you're going to hire somebody in Toronto as a general manager, clean the slate, fire Berube, let them hire his coach. I think the same pertains in New Jersey, and that's why I think Sheldon Keefe is going to be out.
Ooh. Yeah, I've got a list of 5, Emma, that I think we could see vacancies. So obviously Craig Berube in Toronto, Scott Arniel in Winnipeg. I think Andrew Burnett in your neck of the woods there, Emma. I think if they miss out, we could see finally a coaching change there. DJ Smith, he's on an interim basis in LA. Again, if they miss out, I could see them maybe pulling the trigger. And last but not least, this is where I think a Bruce Cassidy could end up next year. Chris Knobloch in Edmonton. If they go out in the first round, heck, if they don't even make it to the Stanley Cup final, I think there may be a coaching change happening in Edmonton. And if so, why not bring a guy whose MO is all about defensive structure to a team that has zero defensive structure? That is the Oilers. So those are my top 5.
Yeah, that's a pretty comprehensive list. I'd have to agree with you on Brunette. Got to remember, in Nashville, you got a new GM coming in now too. So like you said earlier, chance to bring in someone new, give him a clean slate, hire his own people. So definitely lots of potential movement to keep an eye on in the off season here. But we are still in the regular season, coming down the final stretch into playoff time. It's the best time of year. So of course, if you want to read any more about any of the teams, players, topics that we've talked about today here on the show, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947, 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us and listened to us talking some hockey today. Lots to talk about, so we really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode on Thursday. But for now, for Michael Augello and Michael Traikos, I'm Emma Lingan, and we will see you next time.